Great cultures should be highly accountable.
Vision should either attract or repel people.
Courageous communication is vital to setting healthy culture. It is a lazy argument for leaders who don't want to do hard work, but I believe you have to have a healthy culture to leave a legacy.
Welcome back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your girl, Breezy, and I am here with Mr. Adrian Crawford. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. What's like your win for the week, not in work, but like internally?
Win for the week is my win for the year is this idea.
Oh, so you're going to do it in 1 week?
No, I'm saying what my win is for the year is what I'm trying to do almost every week internally, which is this idea of self-value. So really understanding like who I actually am and constantly reminding myself of that and living out of that. So that's my win for the week. And so I have measurables of what that looks like. And so
what are your measurables?
Measurables are just constantly evaluating like negative self-talk. Like, you don't realize it until you start becoming aware of how much I know, or at least for me, that like there's just that constant loop of negative self-talk. So I really try to evaluate how much of that's happening throughout the day. Another thing that helps me is I have like kind of a mantra axiom I wrote out about around this, and so I kind of usually read that like 3 times a day because it kind of like centers me, reminds me, stuff like that. So do I do that? That's one of the ways I evaluate that. And I think the other thing is I go back at the end of my day and I look at my day. I look at encounters and relationships and meetings or whatever, and it's like, did in that moment, was there anything at times I led or felt I led out of like my insecurity or out of a negative place, whatever. And where were the moments where I was very confident in a healthy way in what I was doing. And so I try to go in and evaluate it that way.
How do you think you've gotten to the point to where you can accurately look within?
I think that it's been over the last few years because I think I spent a long time. I think I was always looking within, but I never had the tools to figure out what I was looking for. You know what I mean? I always thought deeply internally, but I didn't know what I was looking for. And then if I did find something, I'm like, oh, but a lot of times the only way I would know that if I felt some type of way, then I maybe hear someone talk about it and they're like, I'm like, oh yeah, I did feel that, or I did understand that. But until, I went to, therapy starting, now it's almost like 13 years ago. It's like when I first started, it was just, man, and just going with Dr. Zoda, learning, then getting the tools. So now it's like, I just have been doing it for a long time now. I just actually have the tools to know what I'm looking for as well.
We've got to get Doc on the pod.
We do have to get Doc on the pod.
I actually thought about that during Culture Creators today. I was like, dang, should we just bring Doc on the pod today?
Doc needs to get on the pod soon. He's very much so. I mean, loads and loads of wisdom and stuff like that. So yeah, he's going to be on there soon. So we'll be getting him.
Today, we're going to talk about culture, which is really exciting because it's something that we think about, we discuss on a pretty regular basis. So to start us off, can you describe what is culture? And not even describe it in a business sense, but think about broader, how would you describe what culture is?
I think culture is really like the way that it's a system of how you behave, in which a system with how you behave then leads to like that behavior leads to like execution of whatever it is. I think you have culture and systems in your home. You have it in your friendships. You have it in your personal life and in your work. When you go work out, the gym you go to, everything has a culture, and culture, it becomes really the system of behaviors that actually get formed, and then it leads to results and execution.
Where do you think that culture originates from? How was it created?
I think culture is created by the people who are actually like leading. And sometimes, I say that somebody always emerges as a leader, and the person, whether that's a person with dominant personality, if that's a person who people just see as a leader, they begin to kind of help set the culture. And so I usually think there's some type of dominant personality, or someone who is seen as the leader is the person who actually begins to do it, or 2 or 3 people, they begin to now push those things. They're influencers in some type of way. They begin to now set a culture.
Okay, so I think that's a good starting point to describe it. There's a ton of nuances to it though, and it's especially over the past few years became a like throwaway word within like politics, within corporate culture, different things like that. How would you describe what people's perception is of culture compared to what you truly believe that it is?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times culture today is seen as stuff that's kind of like, people will say it's important, but the way it's practiced, it's it's secondary, or it's third, or it's fourth. A lot of people think culture is how it makes people feel, right? So you'll hear people say that, like, yeah, we want people to feel good about coming to work, and we want people to, feel supported. We want people to feel whatever. So they think it's about feeling, and what they don't think it's about measurable. So then what that ends up being is that if you just think it's feeling and you can't measure it, it's a throwaway, because what it ends up being is that when the rubber meets the road, people begin to throw culture away. Then you'll start hearing people say, well, yeah, that's great and all, culture's great and all, but, we got to sell this. Culture's great and all, but we got to get to the gross profit. And when I hear that, I already know, if you say that and I listen to you, that lets me know that I don't think you're a very effective leader, because I believe culture absolutely dictates profit. It dictates execution, because what you're doing is you're putting in a system behaviors that lead to execution. You already have a culture. Most leaders are just too stupid to realize they have one. And they think it's all, well, if I just, and their culture may be, well, when things get tough, we just start barking at everyone and saying, we got to sell. If we don't, we're firing people. That's a culture, because what you're putting in a culture of fear. All right, well, then everybody just respond in crisis. All right, here we go. We got low numbers. We're getting to the end of the month. We got low numbers getting to the end of the quarter. All right, here they come. They're going to come barking, yelling. Then everybody's going to start working. And then what you do, you've built now a culture that people don't start working until they feel pressure. So it becomes like, okay, until the boss starts yelling at us, then we'll really start working. That is a culture. And that a culture impacts your bottom line and your numbers. That culture puts stress on people. It puts stress on the person leading, because now all of a sudden they don't even realize that they're creating this, like this anxiety, this fear, this, we have to do it at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter so that we can get somewhere, versus like if you actually build in checkpoints throughout the entire time, you're building culture. If you're holding accountable for what matters, you're building a culture. And so I think that that's what it is. I think a lot of times people just think it's about feeling, and it's about people being feeling good, because they just take the straw man of like, oh, where millennials just want, snap rooms, and they want, safe spaces. And it's just like, dude, that's so freaking lazy. Like, it is a lazy argument for leaders who don't want to do hard work and who don't critically think. And for me, why I'm like so like amped up about this is because work is a place where people go, or, that's what you do more, and you eat. We've talked about this, where you sleep and you work are the two biggest things you do. I believe organizations have a responsibility for creating a good culture, because people are spending their lives away from their families. And what does that mean? That does not mean that you don't demand things from people. That does not mean you have a high level of accountability. I believe great cultures should be highly accountable. No, you have a job. You don't do your job, you get fired. Like, that's in no way, that is a healthy, good culture. But what ends up happening, people just don't want to do the work of it, because most leaders are so emotionally unaware, and they're so emotionally illiterate that they have no idea how they're even feeling or what they're trying to do. And so it's so easy then to let your anxiety, your fears, what drive you just to bark down things, and you just create a bad culture. And I think culture matters. If all of a sudden, if I told you, like, hey, Bree, like, man, let's go into this room, you know what? I mean, there's poisonous gas in there, right? Like, you're like, no, I don't think I'm going to go in there, right? Like, because why? It's what you breathe. That's what culture is. The oxygen you breathe. In most cultures, their oxygen they breathe is not, they want clean air, but that's not, because they don't even know how to test what clean air is. They just think it's just, man, you know what? They don't even think we have a culture. Our culture, because you feel like if I say something and I put it up on a wall, or I say this, then that's our culture. And it's not. It's something that is literally embedded. It's a system.
Okay, so there's a few different things that you went into. And I'm like, okay, I want to be able to touch on all of them. So first thing that I want to ask is, one of the things that we talk about specifically as it relates to vision is that vision should either attract or repel people. Do you think that, because of the conversation being like, oh, culture, especially, I think this can be a leadership perspective, or an executive perspective, but it can also be an employee perspective. It's like, if we have a good culture, that means that 90% of the time I feel really good. Yeah. And I think that we believe something different. I think that we believe that culture should actually both attract and repel people. Like, there should be times where the things that we value, or when we as leaders like live through our convictions within New Rules Collective, that it rubs against one another.
Yeah. I believe, yeah, your vision should attract or repel people. And most people are so codependent, they don't want to repel people. Or some people are such narcissists, then they're like, I don't care if I repel people, right? Or I don't care if I attract people or not. At the end of the day, you should attract or repel. You have to be very clear. But again, it's not a bunch of stuff, but it's very clear things that, and this is, and then that all forms from vision. What is the point of your family? Like, meaning, like, what do you feel like you're supposed to be as a family? What do you feel like you're supposed to be as a company? What do you feel like as an organization? This is our end goal. Then from there, you build values around those things that actually help you stay on mission to your why. And so when you do that, yeah, some people aren't going to like it, and it's okay. Because if it repels them, it should be repelling them to go find a place that fits what maybe their convictions are or their values are. And I think because people don't do that, people get so confused because someone will say, we care about, we've had this so many times, man, we care so much about collaboration. And then you get in there, you're like, no, you don't. You have no desire. Or they won't say, and we do this a lot, we force you to say, if what your number one priority is profit and money, we're going to say that. Because let me tell you this, if you go ask everybody, they all will say this. The things that people talk about, if you go in your organization, say, what do you think is the most important thing here? That's what your values are. It's not what you hope or you aspire to. It's what's felt in the employee experience. And we've walked into so many different places and they all say, they're like, oh yeah, it's money here. That's the biggest value, because they're like, we don't feel pressure, paid attention to. We don't feel like people develop us until money's low or until we're not hitting numbers. Then all of a sudden people come in and they start doing that. That shows you what you value.
So what do you think that it creates when an organization says that they value one thing, but then they act on something different?
It's hypocrisy, and it weakens their leadership over time. When you have hypocrisy like that, what you're going to attract is mercenaries. Mercenaries are people who we go to the highest bidder, right? So we go hire the highest bidder. They can pay me this right now. I'll go work for them. But mercenaries have no loyalty. Their loyalty is to a paycheck. But actually what you want to create, first of all, you want to create missionaries, right? Evangelists. And I think when you have where your culture literally is felt in the employee experience or the organizational experience by those who are in it, those line up, what you begin to create is missionaries, people who are like, yes, I'm a part of this, and they're willing to stay even if the paycheck isn't where they can get a paycheck somewhere else, because these other things matter to them. It feels authentic. They do care about this. We do collaborate. Man, we do hold trust here at a high level. We do have innovation here, or whatever those things are, and they line up. People are more willing to stay. So you build nets around the organization. That's why I think people, they lose people all the time. It's because I don't think they build a right culture. I mean, we've worked with people, and I've seen companies where people, man, they're getting paid less to stay. They're like, dude, this is just the greatest place to work. I love coming here every single day. And again, in a lot of those places, they work freaking really hard. That's just a lazy argument, because when people say, man, I just love working, the culture is great, their natural thing is like, oh yeah, that's fine, but it's like, oh, you guys must have like, free snacks all the time, and and coffee shipped in from Italy. It's like, no, moron. What it is that actually they live out what they say what they believe, and people want to be a part of that.
How do you think that could relate, if you do at all, to our desire for external benefits rather than development internally? The reason why I ask that is because I benefit more from being around a leader who is fully integrated, makes decisions based off their convictions, is clear in where we're going and how it is that we're going to get there, more than I do from
a paycheck,
the snack corner,
because that's a value of yours, and that's something you're like, oh, you actually see the value in that. Versus somebody, they may just see the value and like, man, listen, I only want to work to make as much money as I can because I just want to pay for whatever lifestyle. Again, right, wrong, or it's not even right or wrong. It's like, that's their choice. So then they're able to be like honest about that. But I always tell people, I've done so much free work just to be in an environment to learn. I've taken less money. Matter of fact, we are working on a couple projects right now where I'm taking less money because it's giving me access to learn about a field and a thing that I really want to learn. And I'm a one trial learner. So once we get in and we figure it out and we go through it, next thing you know, the next go around, you know what I'm saying? Like yesterday's price ain't today's price. It goes up because now I know. And so sometimes, I value those things. I value being around leaders, my time, of people who, last night I spent time with someone who, again, is a good friend of mine, but a really good leader, builds a really great culture. So we spent like a few hours together. And to me, he's a friend. We help each other. But man, I was like asking him questions about certain things in the industry that he's in. And I learned a ton last night. That matters to me because that's the value. The value is that, because I know learning that will eventually turn into dollars and things like that. I think so many times today, those who are younger, they will trade in just the fear of I got to be taken care of. I got to get to this. I think we have this marker number we should be in our 20s or our 30s. I should be making this much. And what they'll pass up on is opportunity to learn that later in life, you may have taken a $5,000 check, but if you would have spent this much time with this leader right here for 2 years, that would have been like 30x what you got right there. And so I think that's just the value of yours, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely wisdom there. And we talk a lot about like the idea of not saying that you want a certain lifestyle without the kind of, like grind or work that might truly come with that.
Yeah.
This is a little bit of a sidebar, but I heard something the other day about about how Gen Z wants money but doesn't like to see people with money.
True, it's funny.
How do you think that? Would you agree with that? And how do you think that impacts some of the cultural expectation?
I think they are that way, but here's the truth about it. I think every generation is that way. Everybody loves like the underdog, and then when you become the top dog, like everyone wants to tear you down now. And so I think people are like, yeah, I want to make money. I love money, but I don't like people with money, because here's what it does. People with money or people who've had whatever success, in your eyes, they become the measuring stick for you. And so and I think this is, now I will say generationally, it seems with Gen Z to face that reality of like, oh, they're doing this. Are they better than me? What did they do? Versus it being kind of like, it doesn't, sometimes I think it doesn't challenge. In my generation, if we saw somebody like that, there was this good and bad competitive parts of us where we'd be like, oh no, I want that. I think in this generation, there hasn't been that built where sometimes they can see people with money and things like that. And what you have to do is then like hate on that person because you don't want to climb to try to go chase what they have. And so I think because of that lack of resilience, I think that's one of the reasons why.
Yeah. And also, I mean, to be clear, I'm kind of playing a little bit of devil's advocate right now. I'm Gen Z, and I also do not believe that Gen Z just doesn't like to work hard.
No, I listen, I tell this, I mean, I have a conference I'm speaking at in May, and I was thinking about it this morning. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is like, everyone talks about Gen Z and, oh, they're whatever. I'm like, yeah, man, like 70 to 80% of our workforce in our team, if I'm not mistaken, are like Gen Z. And I'm like, they're rock stars. Because see, and this goes to culture.
Yeah, it absolutely relates.
It goes right to culture of this. You know why? And everybody says, well, you can't talk to them this way, whatever. I'm like, every generation has said that. When I was coming up, our coaches used to literally cuss us out. They would do stuff that was inhumane sometimes. And you know what they would say? This generation, you guys are soft. And then we get older, we say the same thing. The difference is this: if you have a standard, then you hire to that standard, and then you keep the standard. So anyone who comes here, yeah, we work at a very high pace. We have demanding things. It's okay if you don't like that, but we're not changing because there's a mission that's ahead of us. And those who get it, they morph into it. Those who don't, they go somewhere else. And it's okay. They're not wrong. And so I think that's a lazy argument from my generation and those who are leading right now, is that they have cultures that suck. They don't hold accountability. They are too cowardly to really speak up because they're worried about losing people or whatever it may be. And in that, what they do, and they do a bad job of hiring and profiling. They just look at, where did you go to school? They look, or you got an MBA or you got a master's degree. They don't look at really people skills. You know what I'm saying? They just go on, and then what they end up doing, they end up hiring bad people, and they're saying, oh, this generation is this whatever. I'm like, no. When you come into a good culture, the bar raises. It's just, I've been in there. I've been in places where I'm like, I get in that world. I'm like, oh, It's different here. The bar raises. And so that's what great cultures do. And I think that I am such a believer in Gen Z because I actually believe they have the ability, because they have more emotional awareness. But I think because they haven't been taught to like fight through certain things, if they get that, they're rocks. I mean, they're complete rock stars. And I mean, we literally are seeing that with what we have.
Yeah, I feel like on the topic of culture, you don't really do it holistically justice if you don't have some form of conversation about the perceptions generationally and even politically.
Yes. It's just because it goes by what you said, it's communication. I think one of the biggest things that sets culture is courageous communication. If you're going to be a leader to set culture, you're going to you can't be a coward. Like, you just can't. And a lot of people, and I use that word on purpose because it grips you and says, nobody wants to be a coward. But I'm telling you, there are so many people who I'm around who lead, they're so cowardly in their communication. There are people who I'm around who, I mean, they are like externally tough. I mean, they do some very difficult things. You know, they're getting in, Iron Man, they do stuff. They've been whatever. But when it comes like having a one-on-one conversation with someone like, hey, you're late, you would think that like they were literally about to, like, if I say this, somebody's going to kill me. Like, they're just like, I'm like, and so I was saying, most people don't want to do the hard work because it's emotional work internally. It's very difficult to say those things. And I think that courageous communication is vital to setting healthy, really good culture.
So I feel like it's necessary to get into some of the origin of the work that we do, specifically with kind of going into the consulting, leadership, cultural development space within 2020. And we have conversations a lot looking back at the things that we wish we did, that we didn't do, that we wish we knew, that we actually know now. And at the same time, this topic, I feel like, does kind of open up a little bit of a can of worms, but I think you'd love to talk about it. So looking back at 2020, us getting into the space through DEI, can you talk a little bit now on maybe your perspective in 2020 as in DEI's relationship to culture and how that has evolved over time for you?
Yeah. I have been very fortunate to be someone who has like foresight to what's going to come. Some people may call it being a futurist, whatever, or like foresight. So when we got into it, I saw two things. It was about to be an anxiety-filled mess, and people were going to make this into a money grab, which they did. They were going to create a bunch of like anxiety around the thing. And because of the death of George Floyd and where our country was at in that moment, people had to really answer that question. I also knew there was going to be a swing back the other way because, again, it's multiple factors. And I knew the market. There was a bunch of money that we were putting into the market because people had to shut their business down. So companies had a lot of extra cash. So they're feeling the political pressure of this. They're feeling the social pressure, and they got cash. So they're like, oh, yeah, we got to we're going to have a DEI this. And also, I knew there were going to be people who brought strategies that were just about their strategies were going to create more anxiety, not fix the problem. And so in that, going into it, I knew that, like, man, we were practitioners. It wasn't a theory because my whole life I've built diverse worlds. I know what it's like to work with someone who grew up and they had racism. I mean, they were racist. And over time, their perspective changed. And even when I was working with them or friends with them, watching them evolve, like I know the patience and what you have to do. I understand that probably came from this place of this. Maybe it's some ignorance, or maybe it's from a place of pain. I had friends of mine who were, bullied. They went to predominantly all black school. They were bullied by kids who didn't look like them. So now when they grew up, they had this thought toward them. So anyway, I've literally had so many conversations, so many things, and I just have had the scars of building it. I knew what I could bring is wisdom. See, wisdom is the ability to it's having the competence to deal with the complexities of life, to deal with the reality of life. Because life is so complex, you have the competence to know how to apply, how not to apply. So anyway, that being said, that's what I knew we had was wisdom of how to do that. And then as we got into it, what we learned was like, oh, you get into it and you're trying to address the DEI thing. And normally what you realize, like, oh, If their DEI issue is bad, that means their culture is bad. So we were trying to deal with the DEI issue, but overall culture would maybe be bad in the company. And so you couldn't make DEI better because the culture is a bigger systemic problem. So that's when we started getting more into the culture thing, because we realized, no, we got to fix culture, and DEI is actually a part of it. And so as we've seen now, again, over the last 4 years, 5 years, again, what I knew would happen would be like, yeah, DEI is a hot thing in the streets now. But when money starts getting tight, that's the first thing they're going to cut. And so we were very fortunate to kind of have foresight to see that, to keep building in different ways to help companies.
I think that some of our experience, especially starting out, is a wonderful case study on how to build culture. How, when you were, as a leader, were to walk into spaces, oftentimes, especially larger companies, that there are so many people who fall into different extremes of beliefs on how that should play out. How have you practiced walking into that space and helping a top level leader decide how it is they're going to interrupt the patterns that they've created that they would actually like to change?
It starts with them. It's because if you are going into a company, usually the dysfunction you see in an organization is a dysfunction in the leader. It's usually the dysfunctional leader or the leadership team, because I believe everything flows from the top. And so if you have a very anxious culture, you probably have a very anxious leader. If you have a very non-confrontational culture, I guarantee you probably have a non-confrontational leader. So I have to start with them. I have to figure them out. I have to figure out, help them understand, because your internal framework and your internal infrastructures just play out now in like actual like corporate structure. It's just now you lead out of that, and then you set the culture. And so that's the way I have to start. I have to start with the leader and really getting underneath that for them to see where they can see where they've had their mistakes and how they lead. But on the other side of that, they can also see, man, their good characteristics and how we can actually build it out that way.
So whenever you walk into doing this work with companies and leaders, I know you already mentioned the phrase of, I know this like culture thing, it's good, but we need to focus on strategy or focus on the P&L. What are some other phrases that you hear when you first start working with a company that are like, ooh?
A lot of times if anybody brings up culture or whatever, like it's unspoken, but they think these people are soft. They think they don't want to work hard. They think that they want things to be comfortable for them. And okay, there may be some people like that. So whenever I just hear like the language of like, oh yeah, here's this person. Yeah, they care a lot about culture and da-da-da. And I get it, because sometimes the person who's caring about, sometimes that person cares about culture, they may be the person always complaining. They may not want to work hard. They may want like whatever. But that doesn't make it the whole thing. You know what I mean? So I think what leaders will do, they'll look for that one person who fits whatever straw man they have. And then they'll see, that's how it is. That person, she complains all the time. She doesn't really work hard. She's low performing, and she's a culture person. See, that's what happens with culture. And you're like, that's one person. You know what I mean? And I think we always look for that one person to just to bring validity to our argument. And so when I just start seeing people do stuff like that, that's when I begin to be like, really? Like, you have to think through complex things all the time. You couldn't think through complex things on this situation. And so I try to just like show them a lot of times like their faults in their thinking in that area.
So how have you decided what culture you wanted to mark New Roles Collective and created or established accountability within that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for us is what we are all about is authenticity. And so that has to be established. So one of the things is that we establish the idea of self-awareness. It's a reason why, unless you're at a high-end hedge fund or, another type of, top 50 type company, does someone have like a therapist like on their staff? But, we have someone who's one of the leading ones on our staff because of his ability to help people become self-aware. We consider authenticity, self-awareness, teach practices of resilience, and then the idea of empowerment. So that's the number one thing, that we're going to live and build and breathe in a culture that actually really does live that. And authenticity is not perfection. There's sometimes where I think for the rest of your life, there's parts of you that's a hypocrite, but it's this journey of becoming more and more that way, and that being at the core of it. The other thing is empowerment. I really believe that that you're called to with actually empowering people. And so that was the other thing, is that we were going to have a culture to where, man, we don't hold, jobs loosely. So for example, here, one of our, like, it's one of the unspoken is like, there's very clear spoken things in culture, very like, whether your values or whatever. But then we also have the unspoken things, right? It's like the secret menu, at a place. And so like one of the secret menu things here is like, we don't say I, we don't say me, we don't say my, because what that is building language that it's about you, and realizing, no, it's collectively about us. And also we say that because I don't ever want that to be in people's minds that this job is your job or your silo. Because if I feel the best thing to do is to move you, then you're going to feel some type of way because you think it's mine. It's never yours. It's ours. And so we do what's best for the collective organization. And so that was the other thing, is like being able to give power away. We got to develop. You can't develop people. If you're not trying to develop people, then you're not going to be here that long. We're going to be diverse. I believe in that. I believe in diversity of thought. I believe in diversity of ethnicity. I believe in diversity of gender. I believe in just diversity socioeconomically. I believe in diversity of like goals. We have some people in here who are like, man, they're ambitious in the sense of they want to make a lot of money. They want to build something great. And we have other people, man, they want to just do really meaningful work in a certain area, and they're comfortable with a certain amount of money too. So I think all that is a huge part of kind of that. And so I think that's one of the, a few of them that I've worked really hard to try to do. And it's really, you have to operationalize it in everything that you do, in how you do your evaluations, how you do your check-ins, what you're talking about. And, that's why we do a culture creators, and we may can get into that. It's how you, it's your pay plan. That's everything. Everything goes around that.
How often do you decide to invite somebody in, or I guess let me frame, how often do we decide to invite somebody in on our team who we know is going to violate the cultural standard?
I'll give a great example. So she's sitting right in here, right? So like Lauren, and so Lauren, who's our producer, no, and I'm not saying, I knew this about Lauren. Lauren there's talent, such ability, but I also knew like Lauren had never been in an environment where someone was willing to push her, but also willing to lose her, because she's talented. So a lot of times Lauren she could go through life and just people are like, okay, shit, because of her talent, all right, we'll keep her around. She do whatever. But I also, as she got in, I'm like, no, she's talented, but there's so much more that's like within her. And so that was one of those gambles that we were willing to take, and I'm watching, and now she's in a place to where, it's been, it's difficult, being around here. I get it. But the one thing she's done, and I'm super proud of her, she's worked so hard to realize, now she's doing so much internal stuff. And here's what's going to happen in the next 6 months to a year. Even watching her work, what she'll do, it's going to be 10x being able to do that. You know what I mean? Because naturally, just, with that, I'm like, okay, well, I don't know. What does she think? Versus like somebody comes in, I'm eager, I really want to work. Lauren's kind of like laid back. She's like, yeah, whatever. You know what I'm saying? I'd rather go backpacking, in the Canary Islands versus, doing whatever. But here's what's happened. But it was just a belief. So that's somebody. But one thing I will tell you, if I do not believe that you are coachable and teachable, and I know that from the jump, I will not hire you. I do not care. Mm-hmm. Now, if I find that out as we go through, okay. But from the jump, if I know, like I'm talking to somebody and I'm like, yeah, they're not coachable, teachable, I don't deal with you, because here's the reason why. It never ends well. Because at the end of the day, your will and my will is going to cross. And at any day, you're going to choose your will. And I can't do that. Like you can't, there's not like, though it's we, and I do believe in point leadership too. And there's a direction we're going. And so you got to have people who actually are willing to listen in that process.
How have you navigated the nuance of we while also having point leadership?
My job, when I say my part is I navigate it by giving power away and making sure people feel empowered to do what they need to do at the right level of where they are. Like a lot of times we think what I see with leaders, sometimes they give power away, and it's one of the laziest things to do. They just don't want to be engaged with people. So what they do is just give them responsibility without training, without development, without helping them, so they're like, oh yeah, you go do that, man. And you say, oh, you learn on your own. That's stupid. Why would if I've learned something, why would I make somebody have to go through something that's going to take them a year to get, or I can give it to them in like a month. You know what I'm saying? And so I think I've navigated it by saying, I know I'm the point leader, but me being the point leader, my whole job and purpose is to empower others and put everybody else on. I think you have to have that posture as a leader. I exist to put, because I have a skill set to create things. My job is to use the gifts God's given me to help put everybody on to what he's actually calling them to do.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something we do pretty well as well whenever, let's say, we have like a cultural violator, let's just for the sake of it call it that. For those first like 30 to 90 days, we are tyrants and we are petty on holding the standard, and everybody across the board on the team has that level of intensity, and the conversation is pretty clear on like, all right, like we have this amount of time to see how you are going to adjust to the cultural standard. And if it doesn't work out, it's not a good fit for either of us, and that's okay. And I think in that same vein, we also know our capacity on how many cultural violators we can have at a time.
Yeah. I think that, listen, great cultures are petty. You know what I'm saying? It's a straight petty lasso, like the whole time. Like we are straight petty. And what we mean by that, not petty poking at people trying to do, no, but we are like, when there's certain cultural things and we know you're that, we're just no. Like we just, because if you don't get this, you're going to still, we rather do the front. It's like being, it's on the front end. We do it because if not, we'll spend the next 2 or 3 years like doing this and we're not helping them. That's what I think is the big thing. Most people have no clear understanding of building culture, so they don't even understand what they're trying to build. And when I think why being petty, when I mean by that, and holding culture the way that we should, I think it's because it's a care for people. We want them to be really, really good. We want them to be the best version of themselves. And we know that if you will do these things, even when you leave here, that's going to be something so embedded in you that you're going to do it. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, how many people have left here going through stuff like that to where they're helping other organizations, and they'll tell me all the time, man, I learned this being there. And it's like, it's so ingrained in me. I do that. Like a good friend of mine, Billy, who was one of my first employees, Billy says it all the time. He's like, when I go into any place now, he was like, because when we started, we didn't have anything. He was like, so what it allows me to do, he's like, I get so much out. He's like, I have a bigger budget. He's like, and I get so much out of it because I still have the mentality, which you always tell me, always have the mindset of a startup person. And now he's able to, and people are amazed. They're like, oh, how do you think of this? And he gets way more out of a budget because he knew, man, money doesn't make you creative. You know what I'm saying? Actually, less can make you creative. And so anyway, but that's something that he's taken with him, and he's super successful. And so that's why we do it. I think if you're holding those lines like that, you actually care for people.
So how have you become more confident in communicating what kind of cultural guardrails you want to be embodied?
Because I've seen it work. I think that for a long time, they were theories for me. I intuitively thought and knew they could work. And I heard certain things, I heard other people talk about them working. But for me, I had to know in my leadership and in my personality, would this work into what I was actually supposed to do? Now that I've done it, I'm like, oh yeah, this works. And so now it is confidence. It's like knowing, like when I would play basketball, I was a very good shooter and passer. If I was open, there was never a hesitation in me to shoot the basketball because I knew this is what I did. And I knew that I'm going to do it at a pretty high clip. So there was no hesitation, right? Now I know that. I know that I look at people who come in and look at our culture, and they're always amazed. Somebody, shout out to my man T-Bake. T-Bake's on our team, who has come in, and he told me this the other day. He's like, dude, he's like sitting in when you guys do culture care, stuff like that. He's like, the fact of how you have so many younger people just engage and empower, and he's like, they're high level thinkers. He's like, it's unreal. And he sees me in a bunch of different environments, but and then there's other people coming. They're like, man, how are you getting these people to do this? And it's and so I know it just works. So the answer to that, I just know it works. So if I know it works, then I'm just going to do that and be confident in that. So,
So is there one value or embodiment that it's like everybody should have this because it always works?
Yes, I think the one value people should have is authenticity. And I think the way we define it, I think it's because you need to be self-aware. And what I mean by that is that it's okay. Like, I'm not here to define what that means. Some people, man, your literal mission, I mean, I think it's a great goal, but if your goal is like, man, I exist to make as much money as humanly possible, great. You're aware of that. So you're not lying anymore to your, oh man, we care about the team. And you're like, no, we don't. Like, and then they do, we care about making money. So can you do it or not? Right. That's a good thing, because why? Because then you're going to hire people who have that mentality. Are you going to have a resilience to remain that? And then are you going to use that ability from there to empower other people? So for me, I think that has to be, and I don't mean it has to be one of your values you put on the wall, but it has to be in the essence of who you are.
So authenticity is essentially a prerequisite to having a healthy culture.
100% has to be in the, it has to be in really the essence. That now, again, I want to be really clear. Having a quote unquote healthy culture, like, you don't have to have a healthy culture to make money, but you have to have a healthy culture to have a legacy. So you don't have to have a healthy culture. You can have an unhealthy culture, make money, but I believe you have to have a healthy culture to leave a legacy. And so that's what I'm about. I'm about legacy building, things that go beyond your life.
I use the term cultural violator in reference to Lauren's early days. But at some level, we are all cultural violators.
Yeah.
And like, you embody our culture and all of our values at the highest level. And yet, like, on a weekly basis, there are times where you find yourself violating the culture.
100%. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, dude, like, there's times for me where I won't speak up or be authentic about something because I'm worried about how somebody's going to respond to me. That's violating our culture. You know what I mean? I'm not being who I need to be. I think about the idea of, like, again, I think one of the ones I keep diversity around. No, even sometimes I can violate that, because sometimes I'm like, man, having somebody who's a different thinker than me around sometimes for me can be exhausting. Oh my gosh, here we go. They're going to talk about this. They're going to be too slow and all that. But I have to fight that. Because why? Because I need that in my life. So yes, there are cultural violations all the time.
So would you say the win isn't to never have a violation? The win is to be aware of it?
100%.
And how have you practiced doing something about it, especially when you recognize it within yourself?
Is that I try to go throughout my day and multiple times, like, evaluate what goes on. I think every leader should have moments throughout their day or at the end of their day where they do the autopsy of their day. They think about that meeting. How did I feel in there? What did I do? How did I lead that meeting? Was that meeting okay? Was I prepared for that meeting? I think they should do that. And I think as you do, you get better. It's like, here's what it is. It's very, you think about athletes, how they get better. One of the greatest ways athletes get better is watching film. Like, when you get to the highest level, like in the NBA, it is film preparation, because you get to see yourself, where you say the big eye in the sky don't lie, right? Like, you always can see what you're doing. But we don't do that, like, in leadership. Like, we just keep going. But when do we ever stop to be like, man, like, watching film, like, man, how did I do today? Oh man, oh yeah, dude, when such and such said that, yeah, I was pissed. And that wasn't good. That was out of this. Or, man, you know what? I saw such and such violate this. I should have said something. Why didn't I? Okay. Then that's how you get. So that's one of the ways I get better. I consistently think about my interactions, my things throughout my day. I'm very aware of how I'm feeling in that moment, which would bring signals to, okay, is there something good, bad, whatever. And so that's how I've learned to try to work to keep getting better at it. Here we go. So Lauren, who's off the camera, who's our incredible producer, she has a question. What's up?
What are your telltale signs that someone's not teachable?
That's a great question.
Her question is, what are the telltale signs that someone is not teachable?
One, I try to do research on them and see what people say about them. So that's one thing. So before I ever get in the room, I'm trying to see that. Two, I look and see, do they have anyone who's older in their life that they listen to? So I tell me your story, man. How'd you get here? Tell me about, man, who's helped shaped your life? Da, da, da. And if I don't ever hear, like, oh man, I had this person, man, they helped me out of this. If I don't ever hear anything, if it's all about, I just got out of the mud, it was just me, da, da, da. I'm like, all right, this is about to be a difficult one, right? Here's another one. Honestly, I look at their family. One thing is this, and this is just, truth. Men who come from homes where they didn't have a father, doesn't matter what your ethnicity is, they struggle at times receiving from another man. And so I look at that and see how they've reacted and they responded to it. I find out what matters to them, and then I will literally pose a question. I just did this recently with somebody, something that somebody it matters to them, and I think it's a bad decision. So I was like, hey, here's my wisdom in this for you. And I wanted to see how they would respond. And their response was, yeah, I appreciate it, but this is da da da. Okay. Even though I know what they're about to do is going to be the thing, like the thing you want to do is not going to happen. It's because like in that moment, it was something that means something to you. And you ask me for wisdom in it, and I tell you, but then you give me all the reasons why your way's right. To me, that becomes a sign, because things that don't matter to you, yeah, you're fine with. But the things when you're teachable is when things matter to you, you're willing to like hold off, or you're willing to get more insight. Like, I mean, I can say from my own life that there's times I wanted to do things, and but I always used to say this. So like I would have with mentors, whatever, I'm like, but what they say matters to me a ton. And so if they're not for it, or my wife's not for it, then I'm going to pause on it. Unless if I have a very clear conviction, it better work. But that's been very rare. Most of the times I listen and somebody's like, hey, here's why. I take that information and try to process, even though I don't want to, because it teaches me, man, self-control. Because if I feel like, no, I got to do it right now because I'm going to miss a moment. It's very rare do you ever get into a moment where you like, man, you know what? I waited too long for that. Like, that's very rare. It's always like, crap, man, I went too fast. So anyway, all that being said, I think it's a lot of those different things that I try to do to get insight into a person to see how they respond and stuff like that. So. Well, guys, I hope today was actually helpful for you. And here's the thing, maybe as you're listening to this, like you're not someone who has a bunch of direct reports or leading something, but here's the truth. If you have a family, like you're building a culture in your family. You have friendships. You're building a culture in your friendships. You're building a culture within your community of wherever you find yourself. Culture is everywhere. And I believe every person has a responsibility for building healthy culture. If culture is the oxygen we breathe, then we have to create great culture so humans can flourish. And so I hope that you'll start thinking about that. You'll start thinking about even your personal culture that you have around your life. Even do you have negative self-talk? That's a bad culture. If you're not, doing what you need to do physically, that ends up being a bad culture. And what you can do is use a lot of these principles to actually begin to fix that culture. And so, again, as those who write new rules, we are responsible for writing and building really good culture. Until next time, keep writing new rules.